I still remember the day my world turned upside down. It was a quiet Thursday morning, and I was in the kitchen, washing the breakfast dishes, the radio humming softly in the background. The sunlight filtered through the curtains in long, lazy stripes across the floor, and for a moment, everything felt normal. My 3 grandchildren were at the table, eating cereal and chattering about school. I had just poured a glass of orange juice when the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first. Usually, it was my daughter's friends calling or some school inquiry. But this time, the voice on the other end was cold, firm, almost unfamiliar. "This is the police. You need to come down to the station immediately," the officer said. My hands froze mid-motion over the glass. Why? What's happened?" I asked, panic rising. "You are accused of kidnapping your grandchildren. Please come in and cooperate." The words didn't register at first. Kidnapping? My own grandchildren? My daughter, the one who had left them with me years ago because she couldn't take care of them, was accusing me of taking them away. I felt the glass slip from my hand, shattering on the floor, and I sank down onto the nearest chair, trembling. I tried to explain, my voice breaking. "Officer, I've had them since she left. She asked me to take care of them. I've been raising them, feeding them, sending them to school. They've been with me for years. How can this be kidnapping?" The officer's expression didn't soften. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job. You need to come with us and explain everything." I remember the moment like it happened yesterday, the way my eldest grandchild clutched my skirt, her small face pale and wide-eyed, not understanding why the people in uniform were here. The middle one hid behind my legs, whispering my name. And the youngest, barely 5, just stared, holding on to the corner of the tablecloth, too scared to speak. I felt a knot in my stomach tightening with every second. Years of love, of sacrifice, of sleepless nights and endless worry, all reduced to a single word: kidnapping. How could my own daughter, the girl I had nurtured since she was born, accuse me of such a thing? I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker, and tried to understand how it had come to this. I kept replaying every phone call, every visit, every small fight with my daughter over the years, wondering if I had done something wrong. But nothing explained this. I hadn't taken them. She had left them willingly, even begging me to keep them safe. Yet now, my life was on the brink of chaos. The very people I had protected were suddenly being used as a weapon against me. The shock wasn't just in the accusation, it was in the betrayal. It was knowing that the person I had loved, the one whose every triumph and failure I had watched over, could see me as a criminal. The next morning, I had to face the neighbors, the whispers, the side glances as we stepped outside to the police car. My grandchildren clung to me like little lifelines. "Grandma, please don't let them take us," my eldest whispered, her tiny hands trembling against mine. I had no answers for her, no magic words that could make sense of this nightmare. All I could do was hold them, tell them I loved them, and promise I would protect them, no matter what. Even now, I replay the moment I stepped into that police station, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the walls, the clerk's indifferent gaze as I explained my side, the paperwork that demanded I prove a truth I had lived every day. It felt surreal, like I was walking through someone else's story. And through it all, my grandchildren's eyes never left me. They were frightened, yes, but they trusted me. That trust was the only thing I had left to hold on to. I had thought I had survived the hardest parts of life, raising children, juggling work, sacrificing my own dreams for my family. But nothing could have prepared me for this. The accusation itself was enough to shake the foundation of everything I had built. And worse, I realized that from the moment she made the call, my daughter had changed. The little girl I once knew, who I had held through tantrums, heartbreaks, and failures, had become someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could turn years of love into a weapon against me. And so I waited. I waited in that small office, clutching my coat and my resolve, while the officer wrote down my statement. I kept thinking about how life had led me here, about the decisions I had made, and the trust I had placed in people I loved. My heart pounded every time I heard a door open or a footstep approach, afraid it might be her. Afraid that my own daughter had come to take my children from me, to erase the years we had spent together. It wasn't just about the accusation. It was about everything behind it: the choices, the sacrifices, the unspoken words, the nights I stayed awake comforting crying children while my daughter's absence echoed through the house. The thought of losing them now, after everything, was unbearable. And yet, I had no way to fight this other than with truth and patience, the very things I had taught my grandchildren to value. Now my only defense, I looked at them again, at the little faces staring up at me, confusion and fear mixed in their innocent eyes. I promised myself silently that no matter what came next, I would never let go of them. Not because of law or threat, but because they were my family. They had been entrusted to me, and I would carry that responsibility, even if the world turned against me. And that's when the first cracks appeared, not in the children, but in me. I realized that protecting them might mean standing alone, facing a world that would question everything I had ever done. But I also knew one thing: I couldn't let fear decide my actions. Love had carried me through all these years, and it would have to carry me now. I didn't yet know how this nightmare would end. I didn't know if my daughter would come to her senses, or if the accusations would grow, dragging us further into uncertainty. But one thing was clear: everything I had built, every moment of care, every bedtime story, every scraped knee I had kissed, was now on trial. And the people who mattered most, my grandchildren, were depending on me to survive it. The waiting was the hardest part. Every knock on the door, every voice, every whisper in the hallway felt like it carried judgment. I kept thinking about how our lives had once been simple, and now the shadow of suspicion hung over us like a storm cloud. I wondered if she even remembered the days she left them in my care, the nights she had promised she would return soon, but never did. Or maybe she did remember, and it didn't matter anymore. In that moment, as I held my grandchildren close, the world outside seemed irrelevant. There was only us, the little family I had raised in my own home, the children who had no one else to turn to. And I knew, with a certainty that cut through fear like sunlight through clouds, that I would fight for them. Even if it meant facing the person I had once called my daughter. Even if it meant standing alone, because no accusation, no misunderstanding, and no betrayal could erase the years of love we had shared. Not if I could help it. I had never imagined that my life would look like this, full of little feet running around, laughter, cries, and endless questions about homework, snacks, and scraped knees. But when my daughter first left, I didn't think of it as a burden. I thought of it as an opportunity, a way to help, to love, and to do what any parent would do when a child needed care. She had called me late one evening, her voice trembling, apologetic. "Mom, I can't manage them right now," she said. "Please, can you keep them for a while?" I remember that night so clearly. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, and I could hear my own heartbeat as I asked her if she was sure. "Yes," she whispered. "Just for a little while." I agreed without hesitation, thinking that a little while was just temporary. But that temporary became months, and months stretched into years. Every day, I woke early, preparing breakfast, helping with school uniforms, checking homework, and making sure each of them had everything they needed. My life became a rhythm of care: morning routines, lunches, evening stories, baths, and bedtime prayers. It was exhausting, yes, but there was a kind of quiet satisfaction in watching them grow, in knowing they were safe and loved. They were 3 very different children, each with their own personality. My eldest, who was 10 when her mother left, was quiet, serious, and almost too responsible for her age. She reminded me so much of her mother when she was little, but I also saw the innocence my daughter had lost somewhere along the way. The middle one, 7, was wild and curious, constantly asking questions about the world. And the youngest, only 4, was shy and gentle, always watching and absorbing everything like a little sponge. I had to learn patience. I didn't know I had, to manage tantrums, to mediate fights, to comfort heartbreaks over small things that mattered immensely to them. Financially, it was a struggle. I had a small job, just enough to cover the bills for myself. But now, with 3 children depending on me, I had to stretch every penny. I remember walking to the local market, carrying a list in my pocket, calculating prices in my head, choosing cheaper ingredients while still trying to provide nutritious meals. I learned to fix clothes, sew buttons, patch shoes, all to save money. I sometimes went to bed hungry so the children could eat. I sometimes gave up things I loved: new shoes, a small treat, even a cup of coffee so I could afford their school supplies. It was never about self-pity. It was about making sure they had a life that felt normal. Even though their mother had left, I also had to navigate the tricky waters of discipline. I wasn't their mother, but I was the adult responsible for them. I had to find a balance between kindness and authority, between freedom and structure. I had conversations with them that I sometimes thought were beyond their age, explaining why rules existed, why honesty mattered, why respect for each other was important. Sometimes I felt like I was talking to empty walls, because they were children after all. But over time, I began to see the results, the little habits, the careful manners, the kindness they showed toward others. Even with all of this, the days weren't easy. I miss my daughter in ways I hadn't admitted to anyone, even to myself. There were nights when I cried silently after putting them to bed, thinking of her and wondering what had gone wrong. I remembered her as a child so full of laughter, mischief, and dreams, and I grieved quietly for the woman she had become, the one who had left her children behind. The neighbors had mixed reactions. Some admired me, offered help, or dropped off groceries when they could. Others whispered behind doors, making comments about the children's absence from their mother, questioning why she had left. I learned to ignore the judgment, to focus only on the children and their well-being. I became an expert at keeping the home running, from sunrise to sunset, orchestrating a life that, despite the absence of their mother, felt whole. The children themselves had their struggles. My eldest struggled with the absence of her mother, sometimes writing letters she never sent, sometimes asking questions I couldn't fully answer. The middle one was frustrated, lashing out at times, trying to understand why his mother wasn't there, why she had left. And the youngest, in his own quiet way, carried a sadness that sometimes appeared in the middle of playtime, a longing that I could never fully ease. I became their anchor, their constant, the one safe harbor in a life that had been suddenly tossed into uncertainty. I also had to fill gaps I never expected to. Birthdays were celebrated quietly but fully, with little homemade cakes and handmade decorations. Holidays were simple, but I tried to create magic, to give them memories that were happy, even if bittersweet. Bedtime stories became longer, filled with lessons about courage, kindness, and hope. Every night, I prayed for them, asking for protection, guidance, and wisdom to help them grow into strong, caring human beings. Even in the midst of joy, there were reminders of the woman who had left. Sometimes she called, sometimes she didn't. Sometimes she sent gifts or letters, sometimes silence. I had to accept that I couldn't control her decisions, only the environment in which the children were raised. I had to give them stability, reassurance, and unconditional love, even as they grew more aware of the absence and wondered why their mother wasn't there. School mornings were particularly chaotic. I remember juggling 3 lunches, 3 backpacks, and 3 sets of shoes while trying to make sure everyone had brushed their teeth and was dressed properly. I often ran late or forgot something small, but they learned patience and resilience through it. I became a master at packing lunches with minimal resources, creating healthy meals from what little I had. I learned to navigate parent-teacher conferences alone, advocating for them in ways that left me exhausted but proud, and through it all, I became closer to them than I had ever imagined possible. They were my children now, in every sense that mattered. We shared secrets, laughter, tears, and fears. We celebrated victories and comforted losses. I watched them learn, stumble, and grow into little individuals who carried pieces of me and their mother in their hearts. I also learned how to manage my own grief and loneliness. The nights were the hardest, after the children were asleep, when the quiet allowed memories to seep in. I thought about the daughter I had loved, the life I had once imagined for her, the dreams that had been left behind. But I never let that grief spill onto the children. I always reminded myself that my role was to keep them safe and happy, to be a source of comfort and guidance, despite the sacrifices, despite the exhaustion, despite the constant juggling of needs. My days were filled with purpose. I didn't need recognition or thanks. Their smiles and small gestures of love were enough. I learned that family wasn't just about biology or convenience, it was about commitment, care, and showing up, day after day, even when the world didn't acknowledge it. And so, years passed in this rhythm. The children grew taller, voices changing, personalities emerging more clearly, little quirks developing that made them unique. I grew older, my hair grayer, my hands more worn, my back aching from years of tending to them. Yet, through it all, there was a sense of fulfillment. I had given them safety, love, and stability. I had given them home, I never expected that all of this, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every moment of care would one day be questioned. That the very person who had left them in my care, trusting me with their lives, would come back and accuse me of something unthinkable. But that day had come, and suddenly, the life I had built, the trust I had nurtured, and the bond I shared with my grandchildren were all at stake. I spent countless nights reflecting on our life together, replaying moments when my daughter had called, asking about them, promising to return, and never doing so. I remembered her tears the first time she left them, the apologies that came with every phone call. I remembered the quiet sadness she carried in her voice. And now, those memories were tainted by the accusation. Every kind word, every gesture, every promise she had made now felt like it was being twisted into a lie, a tool for her to claim ownership of the children she had abandoned. Through it all, I clung to the children. I watched them grow, not just in body, but in spirit. I taught them to care for each other, to respect others, and to find joy even in hardship. I watched them celebrate birthdays, win small victories at school, make friends, and stumble through the challenges of growing up. And through every moment, I reminded myself, they were my responsibility, my family, and I would not let anyone take that away. Every day was a balancing act between work, school, chores, and emotional support, but it was a life I had chosen, one I would protect at all costs. I had built a home full of love, laughter, and stability, even without their mother's presence. And yet, despite all the care I had given, despite all the years of devotion, I was now being faced with a reality I could never have imagined, a reality where my love and sacrifice were being questioned, where my bond with my grandchildren was under attack, and where I had to prepare myself for the most difficult challenge of my life. After the accusation, life became a constant tension, a pressure cooker of fear and uncertainty that never let up. Every morning, I woke with a knot in my stomach, wondering if today would bring another call from the police, another letter in the mail, another neighbor whispering about the kidnapping woman. My days, which had once revolved around the predictable rhythm of caring for my grandchildren, now felt unpredictable and dangerous. Even the smallest sound, a knock at the door, a car in the driveway, made my heart race. At first, I tried to stay calm. I told myself that truth was on my side, that my years of devotion and love for these children would shine through, that justice would ultimately prevail. But as the weeks passed, reality began to gnaw at me. The police investigations were slow and formal, filled with questions I had answered countless times. Each officer looked at me with polite suspicion, like they wanted to find proof of something I hadn't done. I answered patiently, repeatedly, feeling my energy drain with every interrogation, every document they asked for. Even worse, my grandchildren began to sense the tension. My eldest would wake up at night, whispering that she didn't want anyone to take her away. My middle child asked endless questions about whether mommy would come for them. And the youngest clung to me, eyes wide with fear, unsure why the world suddenly seemed so uncertain. I tried to comfort them, telling them they were safe, that nothing would happen. But inside, I was terrified too. Every interaction with my daughter became a minefield. She would call unexpectedly, her voice cold and measured, asking questions that weren't questions, making statements that carried accusations hidden in polite words. "I hope they're behaving," she said one morning, and I could hear the weight behind it, an insinuation that I wasn't caring for them properly. "They tell me things sometimes," she added. Sometimes meant everything, and I could feel her trying to plant doubt in my mind, trying to control the narrative. I began noticing how my words were being twisted, how casual comments were later repeated to authorities as proof of guilt or neglect. Even the smallest mistake, a forgotten school project or a spilled cup of juice, became ammunition. The tension wasn't just external, it seeped inside, shaping how I moved, how I spoke, how I interacted with the children. I felt like I was constantly performing, constantly proving that I belonged, that I was their rightful guardian. Financial strain worsened. The legal fees, the unexpected trips to the station, the constant need to gather documents and statements, all of it drained my resources. I had never imagined that love and care could become something that had to be defended in court. I began questioning myself constantly. Had I done something wrong? Had I failed in some way that justified her accusation? Every past decision was suddenly scrutinized, every action reevaluated. I learned quickly that silence could be dangerous. If I hesitated, if I didn't respond exactly as expected, my words could be turned against me. Friends and neighbors began to withdraw, some quietly avoiding contact, fearing they might be drawn into the accusation. I felt isolated, trapped in a shrinking world where even familiar faces could no longer be trusted. Inside the house, the dynamics shifted. My grandchildren were confused and frightened, sometimes mirroring my anxiety without realizing it. Arguments flared more easily, tears came faster, laughter felt muted. I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, helping with homework, cooking meals, telling bedtime stories, but even those routines felt heavy, charged with tension I couldn't escape. I had to be careful with every word, every look, every gesture, knowing that someone, somewhere was scrutinizing everything. My daughter's attempts at control were subtle but relentless. She would suggest things in passing that made me question my own parenting. Maybe they need a change, she said once, and I realized she meant she wanted to remove them. She would speak to the children directly on the phone, leaving me out, asking them questions I hadn't approved, planting ideas that would later surface in interviews or reports. It was exhausting to monitor, to counteract, and to reassure the children. Simultaneously, I began keeping meticulous records: every meal, every school project, every doctor's visit, every moment of care. I documented everything because I knew that one day, these records might be the only defense I had against the accusations. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, my conversations, even my tone of voice, knowing that the wrong word could be taken out of context. My life became a constant balancing act between protecting the children emotionally and shielding myself legally. Every interaction with outsiders felt like a test. The school staff, the neighbors, even casual acquaintances, everyone became part of a web of observation, whether I liked it or not. I had to present an image of calm competence while my heart raced with anxiety inside. I had to act as if life was normal, while knowing that one misstep could tip the scales. Sleep became difficult. Nights were filled with vivid worries. What if she found a way to take them? What if the courts misunderstood the situation? What if my years of care weren't enough? I began waking in the middle of the night, listening for sounds in the house, checking that all the doors were locked, that my grandchildren were safe. Every creak of the floor, every passing car felt like a threat. I had never imagined that fear could live in the bones this way, that worry could become so physical, so all-consuming. I also struggled with my own feelings toward my daughter. I loved her, still, in the way a mother loves, but I felt a deep hurt, a betrayal that I couldn't express. How could she turn against me after all I had done? After all the years I had cared for her children, sacrificed for them, loved them as my own. The emotional weight of that betrayal was heavy, a constant ache behind the tension I carried daily, and yet, through all this, I had to maintain control for the children, for myself, for the life we had built. I couldn't let fear dominate me. I couldn't let despair seep in, because my grandchildren depended on me. I had to find moments of calm, small pockets of reassurance, reading stories at bedtime, baking simple treats, playing quiet games on rainy afternoons. These small acts were lifelines, reminders to the children that despite the storm outside, home was still a safe place. I began noticing changes in them too. They were growing wary, more cautious around strangers, more sensitive to tones and looks. I had to teach them resilience, how to hold on to their own truth, how to trust their instincts, how to understand that accusations didn't define who they were or what our family truly was. I tried to instill strength in them, even as I struggled to maintain my own. Time blurred into a constant cycle of tension. Weeks turned into months. Every phone call from her, every inquiry from authorities, every whispered comment from neighbors was a reminder that the storm wasn't going away. My home, once a place of warmth and laughter, felt heavier, charged with anxiety. I realized that no matter how carefully I managed, no matter how much love I poured into my grandchildren, the shadow of her accusation loomed over us all. And the hardest part, feeling powerless, feeling that all the years of care, all the sacrifices, all the nights spent worrying and praying for the children's well-being could be questioned with a single call, a single accusation. It was a slow, grinding pressure that weighed on my mind, my heart, and my spirit. Yet, I knew I couldn't show weakness. I had to be steadfast, resilient, the anchor in the storm. Every day was a reminder that love alone might not be enough, that patience, documentation, and proof of care would now define our reality, that even family could become a source of control, manipulation, and tension. But through it all, I clung to the one thing that mattered most: the children. They were my life, my purpose, my reason for enduring the mounting pressure. And I would not, could not, let the accusations, the manipulations, or the fear take them away from me. It started with a small, almost insignificant detail: a misplaced folder in the back of my filing cabinet that I had forgotten about. I had kept it for years, thinking it was just old receipts and paperwork from the early days of raising my grandchildren. But that day, as I was searching for something else, I saw a glimpse of yellowed paper sticking out. I pulled it free, and my breath caught. It was a series of letters, documents, and signed statements, proof that my daughter had left the children in my care willingly. Each page detailed agreements, promises, and her own acknowledgement that she could not manage the children at that time. I stared at it for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to speak. The evidence was there, clear as day, and yet, for years, I had been forced to navigate this nightmare without it. Somehow, it had been overlooked, buried under the weight of everyday life. Now, in my hands, it was a lifeline. I began gathering everything else I could find: medical records, school enrollment forms, photographs, any written proof of my role in their upbringing. Every document I held seemed to pulse with power, each one a reminder of the truth that had always existed. The next step was terrifying. I had to bring this evidence to the authorities, to the court, to anyone who would listen. It wasn't enough to hope that someone would see reason. I had to confront the situation head on. I arranged a meeting with the family court, my hands trembling as I carried the files, my grandchildren quietly trailing behind me. Sensing the importance of what was about to happen, when I entered the courtroom, I felt the weight of years pressing down on me: the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the love, the fear, all converging in this single moment. My daughter was there, sitting across the room, composed, cold, as if she had rehearsed this moment 100 times. Her eyes flicked to me briefly, assessing, calculating. She didn't smile, didn't show a hint of the mother I once knew. It was a strange, surreal sensation to see her there. The person who had entrusted me with these children now standing as my accuser. The judge called the session to order, and the air was thick with tension. I began presenting my evidence: letters, receipts, signed statements, photographs, school records, every single piece meticulously organized to show the reality of the past years. I spoke calmly, deliberately, trying to convey not just facts, but the truth of our lives. These children have lived with me for years, I said, my voice steady despite the flood of emotions inside me. Their mother left them in my care willingly. I have provided for them, raised them, and loved them every day. This accusation is not just false, it disregards the years of devotion and care I have given. There was a pause, a silence that seemed to stretch forever. The courtroom absorbed my words, the documents lying open like proof of a life that had been overlooked. And then, slowly, the reality began to shift. The officers, the court officials, even my daughter, were forced to acknowledge what had been right in front of them all along. The truth was undeniable. My daughter's expression changed, not outwardly, but in subtle ways. I noticed a slight flicker of doubt in her eyes, a tension in her jaw, a hesitation that betrayed the certainty she had tried to project. She had built her narrative on manipulation, on the assumption that time and distance could rewrite the past. But now, faced with concrete proof, her story faltered. She tried to speak, to explain, to justify, but the words sounded hollow, rehearsed, and unconvincing. The children, too, sensed the shift. My eldest glanced up at me, her eyes wide, almost incredulous, as if realizing for the first time that the world could be just, that the truth could emerge and protect them. The middle one squeezed my hand, a silent show of support and trust, while the youngest peeked out from behind my skirt, a small, hopeful smile forming on his lips. In that moment, I understood something profound: the bond we had built, the years of care, the love and trust we had shared, were stronger than any accusation, stronger than fear, stronger than manipulation. The turning point came when the judge reviewed the documents, taking each page seriously, weighing the years of care, and acknowledging the documented evidence of my role in raising the children. The atmosphere shifted subtly, the tension easing, replaced by a quiet recognition of the truth. The accusation of kidnapping, once so heavy and suffocating, began to lose its grip. It was as if a window had opened, letting in sunlight that had been blocked for far too long. I remember looking at my daughter then, and seeing the human reality behind her actions, her own struggles, her regrets, her attempts to reclaim control over a life she had abandoned. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no grand accusations. It was simply the truth, emerging, steady and undeniable, and it altered the balance of power. The court recognized that I had acted in good faith, that I had provided care and stability, and that the children's well-being had always been my priority. I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that justice had finally begun to manifest, that the weight of false accusations would begin to lift. Sadness for the broken relationship, for the years lost, for the fact that it had come to this point at all. But even in that sadness, there was a quiet pride in the life I had built for these children. Pride in the resilience we had shown. Pride in the love that had endured despite betrayal and fear. The court sessions continued, but the tension was different now. I was no longer on the defensive. I spoke with clarity, presenting facts without fear, relying on truth rather than emotion. My daughter attempted to challenge certain details, but the evidence was undeniable. Witnesses, teachers, neighbors, people who had known the children and witnessed our life together spoke in our favor, confirming the years of care, the routines, and the stability I had provided. For the children, this revelation was transformative. They began to relax, to laugh more freely, to feel secure again. I watched them slowly let go of the anxiety they had carried, small signs of relief appearing in gestures and expressions. Bedtime became easier, mornings calmer, and the little routines of everyday life began to feel safe once more. It was as if the storm that had hung over our heads for so long had finally started to clear, and I felt a sense of empowerment I hadn't experienced in years. Not because I had won, but because truth had prevailed. Because the years of love, sacrifice, and patience, the small, often invisible acts that defined my life, had been recognized. I had survived manipulation, suspicion, and betrayal, and emerged intact, still standing as the guardian, protector, and anchor for the children who depended on me. It wasn't an easy victory. It came with the weight of reflection, the knowledge of broken ties, and the reality that some relationships may never heal. But it was real, undeniable, and deeply satisfying. The turning point had come, not through anger or confrontation, but through evidence, patience, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. For the first time in months, I felt a fragile sense of peace. The nightmare of accusations, the oppressive tension, the fear of losing everything, it had started to unravel. And I realized that the most important battle had never been against my daughter, the courts, or the world. The battle had been to maintain my integrity, to protect the children, and to stay true to the love that had defined our lives together. And in that quiet realization, I knew that the future, though uncertain, held the possibility of healing, stability, and dignity. The storm had passed, and while scars remained, so did hope, a hope rooted in truth, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a grandmother and her grandchildren. The weeks after the court hearings felt strange, almost surreal. The oppressive weight that had hung over our home for so long had finally begun to lift, leaving a calm I hadn't realized I'd been craving. The children were calmer, moving through their days with laughter that no longer felt tentative or anxious. I watched them in awe sometimes, amazed at how resilient they were, how quickly the fear and uncertainty of the past months seemed to dissolve under the safety of truth. It wasn't that everything went back to normal immediately. The echoes of suspicion lingered, and there were moments when I caught my daughter looking at the children with a mix of longing, guilt, and uncertainty. But those moments no longer carried the power to unsettle us. The court's acknowledgement of the facts, the documented evidence of care, the testimonies from neighbors and teachers had reinforced something profound. Our life together was real. Our bond was undeniable. I remember one quiet afternoon, sitting on the porch with the youngest, who had grown increasingly attached over the years, holding a small toy in his hands. He looked up at me, his wide eyes shining with trust, and said, "Grandma, I knew you wouldn't let anyone take us away." His voice was soft but full of certainty, and in that moment, I realized how much this ordeal had tested not just me, but all of us. Yet here we were, intact, together, and stronger for it. Even the eldest, who had been the most guarded and serious of the three, began to relax. She started talking about her dreams again, sharing little stories about her day, asking questions about the future without that constant shadow of fear behind them. She hugged me more often, sometimes unexpectedly, and I realized that through all the chaos, love had remained our constant. It had anchored them, kept them grounded, and reminded them that family wasn't about accusations or absences, it was about care, presence, and commitment. I reflected a lot during those days, thinking about my daughter not with bitterness, but with clarity. I understood that she was struggling in her own ways, carrying her own regrets and mistakes. I didn't condone what she had done, and I knew it had caused immense pain, but I could see the truth beneath it. She had been lost, and in her loss, she had hurt us. Accepting that didn't make it easier, but it allowed me to focus on what mattered: the children's stability and our home. Life returned to its rhythm, gentle and measured. Mornings became busy but calm, filled with breakfasts, school preparations, and small conversations. I continued my work, now able to give my full attention to the children without the shadow of fear looming overhead. Evenings were for stories, laughter, and quiet reflection. We still had tough days, moments when frustration or exhaustion got the better of us, but they no longer carried the weight of a world threatening to pull us apart. I began to notice subtle changes in myself as well. The constant tension that had defined the past months had left me weary, but it had also strengthened me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had learned patience, resilience, and the importance of staying grounded in truth, no matter how the world tried to twist it. I had learned that love wasn't just about giving, it was also about standing firm, protecting, and advocating for those who depended on you. The children thrived in this new environment of calm. Their laughter returned in full measure, their curiosity blossomed, and their trust in me deepened. I felt a quiet pride watching them grow, not just in height, but in confidence, kindness, and understanding. Every scraped knee I bandaged, every homework problem I guided them through, every gentle word of reassurance felt meaningful in ways I hadn't fully realized until now. Even our relationship with my daughter began to shift subtly. There were no grand reconciliations, no sudden surges of affection, but there were small, cautious steps: phone calls where she asked about their school projects, messages checking in, moments when she observed their growth without trying to claim it as her own. I maintained my boundaries carefully, aware that trust takes time to rebuild. But I also recognized that these small gestures were signs of acknowledgement, even if incomplete. I found myself reflecting on what justice really meant. It wasn't revenge or punishment or dramatic confrontation. Justice, in our case, was quiet, earned, and deeply personal. It was the recognition of truth after years of care. It was the stability of my home and the safety of the children. It was knowing that despite everything, the bond we had nurtured could not be erased. That was the most profound form of justice I could imagine, lived. Quiet, enduring. I also began to allow myself moments of gratitude for the resilience of the children, for the support of neighbors who had quietly stood by us, and for the clarity that the truth had finally emerged. Life was not perfect. The scars of the accusation would linger, subtle and unspoken, but they no longer dictated our daily existence. The storm had passed, and we had endured. Evenings became a time of reflection, where I would sit quietly after the children were asleep, sipping tea and thinking about how far we had come. I thought about the early mornings, the late nights, the endless sacrifices, and I allowed myself a quiet sense of pride. I had survived fear, manipulation, and uncertainty. I had protected my grandchildren through it all, and now, we could begin to heal together. There were moments of simple joy: baking cookies on a rainy afternoon, reading a favorite storybook, helping with a school project that had seemed impossible, listening to their laughter spill across the rooms of our home. These moments, once overshadowed by fear, now carried a lightness and peace that had been absent for far too long. I realized that the quiet justice we had earned was more powerful than any dramatic confrontation could ever be. It was in the daily life we shared, the love we nurtured, the routines that offered security and comfort. It was in the smiles of the children who knew they were safe, in the evenings, filled with calm conversation, in the sense of home restored, and in this calm, I understood something fundamental. Life's hardest battles often arrive unannounced, shaking us to our core, but they also reveal the depth of our resilience, the strength of our love, and the quiet power of truth. I had learned, through fear, tension, and uncertainty, that standing firm in love and integrity is the most profound act of courage. I watched the children one evening as they played in the garden, the sun low in the sky, casting long golden shadows. Their laughter rang clearly, free from hesitation or fear. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. Everything that had been tested, the trust, the love, the sacrifices had endured. The storm had passed, and we were whole, quietly triumphant, and resilient in ways words could never fully capture. And as I closed the door that evening, listening to their chatter fade into quiet bedtime routines, I understood that life, even after betrayal and accusation, could return to its gentle rhythm. Love, patience, and truth had won, not with fanfare, not with spectacle, but with the quiet dignity of a family who had endured together and come out stronger on the other side. We had survived. And in surviving, we had found a new sense of calm justice, one that could never be taken from us.